When I sat down for our anniversary dinner, the last thing I expected was for my wife to drop a bombshell that would shake the very foundation of our marriage. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, a night to reflect on the years we had spent together, building a life filled with love, trust, and shared dreams. But instead, it turned into a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. Let's rewind a bit. My name is Alex, and I've been married to Emily for the past 6 years. We were that couple everyone thought had it all figured out, loving, supportive, always in sync. Or at least that's what I thought. As it turns out, I was living in a different reality than she was. The evening started off perfectly fine. We were seated at this fancy restaurant that Emily had picked out, a place that was way above our usual dining budget, but I figured it was a special occasion, so why not? We clinked our glasses of overpriced champagne, and I was ready to toast to another year of happiness. But as I looked into her eyes, I noticed something was off. She had this nervous energy about her, like she was gearing up for something big. "Alex," she began, placing her hand over mine. "There's something I need to talk to you about." My stomach dropped. The tone of her voice sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I braced myself, expecting maybe a confession about a surprise vacation or some news about her job. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and I think it's time we try something new in our marriage," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I want us to have an open relationship." I blinked, trying to process what she just said. An open relationship? This was completely out of left field. I felt like the ground had just opened up beneath me. For a few seconds, I was convinced that this was some kind of joke, that maybe she was setting up for a punchline. But the serious look on her face told me otherwise. I felt a surge of emotions, shock, confusion, anger, all hitting me at once. "You want to what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, trying to keep my cool as the waiter walked by with a tray of sizzling steaks. "I think it would help us grow," she continued, as if she had rehearsed this speech 100 times. "I want to explore other connections, to date other people but still be married to you. It could bring us closer, make us stronger." I just stared at her, completely blindsided. This wasn't the Emily I knew. The woman sitting across from me, talking about wanting to date other men, was a stranger. I couldn't understand where this was coming from. I felt my hands shaking under the table, my appetite gone. I had been looking forward to this dinner all week, and now I was sitting there, feeling like my entire world was collapsing around me. "You're serious about this?" I asked, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I had misunderstood her. But she nodded, her expression unwavering. "I've already given it a lot of thought. This is something I need for myself, to figure out who I am outside of us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For 6 years I thought we were happy. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but I never imagined that she was so unhappy that she wanted to sleep with other people. And to drop this bombshell on our anniversary dinner, in a public place no less, it felt like a calculated move, as if she knew I wouldn't make a scene here. I needed to get out. I couldn't sit there and listen to her talk about self-discovery and personal growth while my heart was breaking. Without saying a word, I stood up, threw some cash on the table, and walked out of the restaurant. I heard her calling my name, but I couldn't turn back. The last thing I wanted was to make a scene in front of a room full of strangers. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How did we go from planning our future together to her wanting to explore other men? Was there someone else already, or was this just some midlife crisis kind of thing? My mind was racing, replaying every conversation, every moment we had shared over the years, searching for clues I might have missed. Eventually, I ended up parked by the beach, staring out at the dark, churning waves. I stayed there all night, lost in my thoughts, wondering if I had somehow failed her, failed us. The dawn broke, and I still didn't have any answers. All I knew was that the life I thought we had was gone, shattered by a single conversation. When I finally got home the next morning, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. But there was no time to rest. I needed answers, and I was going to get them, even if it meant tearing open wounds that might never heal. I dragged myself through the front door, feeling like I had aged a decade overnight. My head was pounding, my eyes were bloodshot, and the sickening taste of betrayal lingered in my mouth. The house was eerily silent. No sign of Emily, no sounds of her usual morning routine. For a brief moment, I dared to hope that maybe I had dreamt the whole thing, that our anniversary dinner had gone smoothly and we had come home like any other couple, happy and in love. But the reality hit me as soon as I walked into the living room. Emily was sitting there, perched on the edge of the couch, looking like she hadn't slept either. Her eyes were red, but not from crying. It was more like she was preparing herself for round 2 of last night's conversation. I could feel my pulse quicken, anger bubbling up inside me as I remembered her words. "Alex," she started, her voice soft, almost cautious, as if she were trying to approach a wild animal. "I was worried when you didn't come home. I didn't mean to spring this on you the way I did, but—" I cut her off, unable to stomach another rehearsed speech. "Are you serious about this, Emily? Is this really what you want?" I was leaning against the wall, my arms crossed, trying to put some distance between us, both physically and emotionally. I wasn't ready to hear her justify tearing our marriage apart. "Yes, I am," she said, a hint of defiance creeping into her voice. "I know it's a lot to take in, but I've been feeling this way for a long time. I need something more. I need to find myself, Alex." The audacity of her words made me laugh bitterly. Find yourself? By sleeping with other men? How the hell is that supposed to help our marriage? I could feel my voice rising, the frustration and betrayal spilling out like a dam breaking. I knew yelling wouldn't solve anything, but I couldn't help it. I was hurt, confused, and angry beyond words. "I'm not asking you to understand," she replied, looking at me with those pleading eyes that used to melt my heart. But now they only made me feel like a fool for ever trusting her. "I'm asking you to trust me on this journey. I want us to stay married, to stay partners, but I need this freedom." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too, to keep me as her loyal husband while she explored her fantasies. It felt like I was some kind of safety net, there to catch her if her new lifestyle didn't work out. The thought made my stomach churn. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Emily, I can't do this. I won't be the guy sitting at home while you're out on dates, pretending this is all normal. If you want an open marriage, then you're on your own. I'm not going to share my wife with anyone." For a moment there was silence. I could see the conflict in her eyes, like she was torn between her desires and the reality of what it would cost her. But then, she doubled down. "I love you, Alex. I really do. But I can't ignore what I need for myself anymore. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you what's going to happen." Those words were the final nail in the coffin. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I married, was gone. In her place was someone who didn't care if she destroyed everything we had built together. It was like watching a stranger hijack the body of the person I loved most. "Fine," I said, my voice cold and detached. "If that's how you feel, then you can pack your bags and go. You want freedom? You've got it. But you're not coming back here expecting everything to be the same. You can't have it both ways, Emily." I could see the shock on her face. She probably thought I'd cave in, that I'd be the understanding, supportive husband she could walk all over. But I was done being her doormat. I turned and walked out of the room, not wanting to see the hurt and confusion in her eyes. I had my own pain to deal with. I heard her soft footsteps behind me as I went up the stairs to our bedroom. "Alex, please, let's talk about this. We can find a way to make it work," she pleaded, but I was already packing a bag. Not for me. I was packing hers. I pulled her clothes from the closet, shoving them into a suitcase, with a fury that surprised even me. "Don't bother," I said, zipping up the bag and tossing it at her feet. "You made your choice, Emily. Now live with it." She stood there, looking like I had slapped her. I half expected her to break down, to beg for forgiveness, to say it was all a mistake. But she just stood there, staring at me with that same determined look, like she was convinced this was what she needed to be happy. "Fine," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll go. But this isn't the end, Alex. I'm not giving up on us." I didn't bother replying. I was too exhausted to argue, too heartbroken to care. I watched as she turned and walked out of our bedroom, out of our home, and possibly out of my life. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone with the echo of her words and the wreckage of our marriage. The rest of the day was a blur. I called in sick to work, needing time to process everything. I wandered around the house, every corner reminding me of her, of us. It was like I was living in a museum of memories, each one tainted now by her betrayal. I couldn't stay there, surrounded by the ghosts of what once was. So I grabbed my keys and left, not knowing where I was headed, just needing to escape the suffocating pain. As I drove aimlessly through the city, I kept replaying our conversation in my head. Was there something I missed? Was I such a terrible husband that she felt the need to look elsewhere for happiness? The questions were endless, and the answers elusive. But one thing was clear: I couldn't live in the shadow of her journey any longer. It was time to start thinking about my own future, a future without her. The next few days were a blur. I don't remember much, just that I was in survival mode, barely eating, barely sleeping. The house was quiet, too quiet. It's funny how you never notice the little things until they're gone. The sound of her humming while making coffee, the soft patter of her feet as she moved around the house, all gone. It was like the life had been sucked out of our home, leaving only a hollow shell. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office to avoid coming back to an empty house. My coworkers noticed something was off, but I wasn't in the mood to explain that my wife had blindsided me with the worst anniversary gift imaginable. I became a master at faking smiles, but inside, I was falling apart. Then, one day, while I was going through the motions at work, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, Alex, it's Jessica," a familiar voice chirped on the other end. Jessica, Emily's best friend. The one I had always considered a bad influence. I clenched my jaw, wondering what the hell she wanted. "What do you want, Jessica?" I asked, my patience already worn thin. "Listen, I just wanted to check in on you. Emily's been staying with me, and she's not doing great," Jessica started. There was a hint of concern in her voice, but I wasn't buying it. As far as I was concerned, Jessica was the devil on Emily's shoulder, the one who had filled her head with all these ridiculous ideas. "I really don't care how she's doing," I snapped. "She made her bed. Now she can lie in it." Jessica sighed dramatically. "Look, Alex, I know you're hurt, but this whole thing, it's complicated. Emily just needs some time to figure things out." I had to laugh at that. Figure things out? She had years to figure things out, Jessica. Instead, she blindsided me with this open marriage crap on our anniversary. So forgive me if I'm not exactly sympathetic. There was a long pause on the other end. I could almost hear the wheels turning in Jessica's head, like she was trying to decide whether to say what she really wanted to say. Finally, she spoke. "Maybe you should know that, Emily, she's been seeing someone. I didn't want to be the one to tell you, but you deserve to know the truth." I felt the floor drop out from under me. I had suspected it, of course, but hearing it confirmed was like a punch to the gut. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "A guy named Mike," Jessica said, almost apologetically. "They've been seeing each other for a while, even before she brought up the open marriage idea. I told her it was a bad idea, but she wouldn't listen. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I was no longer just the husband who wasn't enough. I was the fool who had been lied to, betrayed by the one person I thought I could trust. I thanked Jessica for the information, not really knowing what else to say, and hung up. The rest of the day was a haze. I walked around in a fog, my mind replaying every conversation, every look, every touch that now felt like a lie. I thought back to the nights Emily had come home late, claiming she had been out with the girls. I had never questioned it, never doubted her. How could I have been so blind? That evening, as I sat alone in our too big, too empty house, I decided I was done being the victim. I needed answers. I needed to know just how deep this betrayal went. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. I remember sitting in that PI's dimly lit office, feeling like I was in some war film. The investigator, a grizzled man named Tom with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow, listened to my story with a detached professionalism. When I finished, he nodded slowly, like he had heard it all before. "Listen, Alex, I've seen a lot of these cases," Tom said, leaning back in his creaky chair. "I'll get you what you need. But be prepared. Sometimes the truth is uglier than you expect." Over the next week, I tried to carry on with life as normally as possible, but every time my phone buzzed, my heart would skip a beat, wondering if it was a new update from Tom. My mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal, but also a strange sense of relief that I was finally taking control. Then, one night, the phone call I had been waiting for came. Tom's gravelly voice was on the other end. "Alex, I've got something for you. I'll send over the files." I opened the email with trembling hands, my stomach twisting in knots. There were photos of Emily with Mike, holding hands, kissing, looking every bit like a couple in love. I felt my blood run cold. There were also detailed reports of their weekend getaways, expensive dinners, even gifts he had given her. The evidence was overwhelming. But the worst part? The timestamps. She had been seeing Mike for months before our anniversary dinner. The entire time she had been finding herself, she had already found someone else. I stared at the photos, my hands shaking, my heart breaking all over again. It was one thing to suspect an affair. It was another to see it in vivid color, to have undeniable proof that your wife had not only betrayed you, but had planned her betrayal meticulously. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, surrounded by the damning evidence of my wife's betrayal, wondering how I had been so blind, so trusting. I knew one thing for sure, there was no coming back from this. Emily had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. The next morning, I called my lawyer. It was time to end the charade. Emily wanted freedom, and I was more than willing to give it to her, but on my terms. I was done being the nice guy, done being the fool. If she thought she could walk all over me and still keep our marriage as a backup plan, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. It wasn't easy, not by a long shot. The days bled into one another, the monotony broken only by brief flashes of anger or grief, depending on the hour. I had been living in a fog for so long, but now, with the evidence in front of me and the decision made, there was no turning back. I remember the first night I slept in our bed alone. The sheets felt cold. The whole room felt wrong without her there. The absence of Emily's presence hit me harder than I had expected. It was one thing to have your partner tell you they want something as absurd as an open marriage, but it was another to actually feel the void they left behind when they moved out. Her side of the bed remained untouched, a cruel reminder of the life I thought I knew. At work, I was a walking zombie. I had always been able to compartmentalize my emotions, but this was different. Every meeting felt like I was pretending, faking my way through it. It wasn't like I could talk to anyone about this. Who would understand? Who would look at me and think, "Yeah, I get it, your wife wants to date other men while you're supposed to be her husband?" So I kept it all inside, wore the mask, and kept on with emotions. When I finally sat down with my lawyer to discuss divorce proceedings, the weight of it all hit me in a way I hadn't anticipated. The reality of ending a marriage that had once meant everything to me, everything we had built together, the vacations, the plans, the future we had talked about, was now slipping away, one document at a time. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Karen, didn't sugarcoat anything. "This is going to get messy," she said bluntly. "But you're doing the right thing. Let's get the evidence, get your ducks in a row, and we'll go from there." I had to remind myself that I wasn't alone in this. I had Karen. I had my family, even though they were a bit distant when it came to giving advice on emotional matters. But more than anything, I had to rely on myself. The private investigator's report came through quickly, too quickly really. There was more on Emily than I had anticipated. It wasn't just Mike she had been seeing. She had been meeting up with other men, too, on business trips, at hotels, even in places I knew well. The humiliation of it all was suffocating. I had been so blindsided by her request for an open marriage that I never once considered the full extent of what had been going on behind my back. But now I knew, and with that knowledge came a burning desire to move forward, to shed the skin of this past life and begin again. After the shock wore off, I started focusing on myself. For the first time in months, I spent time doing things that made me happy, going for long runs, hitting the gym, spending time with friends who had my back. I even started traveling for work again, something I had stopped doing because Emily had always wanted me home. It felt good. I began meeting people, nothing serious at first, just some casual dates here and there. I met Diane a few months later, through a mutual friend. She was kind, funny, and had a lightness about her that I hadn't realized I was missing. We clicked, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like maybe there was life beyond Emily. Diane wasn't in any rush to define things, but she made it clear she enjoyed spending time with me. That was enough for now. Emily, on the other hand, was a different story. She still sent me texts from time to time, trying to re-enter my life. She promised she was done with exploring and wanted to come back. The first time she called, I had just gotten home from a dinner with Diane. I had a glass of wine in my hand, feeling good about where my life was heading. "Alex, can we talk?" she asked, her voice soft, almost pleading. "What is there to talk about, Emily?" I replied, trying to sound calm. "You've made your choices. You've made your bed." She was silent for a long time before speaking again. "I've changed. I've thought about what I've done. I want to come back and start over. We can have a family, a real family, the way we always talked about." It was like a punch to the gut. Her words sounded so rehearsed, so hollow, like she was reading from a script. "I don't know who you think you're fooling, Emily," I said, my voice tight. "You don't get to just waltz back into my life after everything. You've betrayed me. You've betrayed everything we had." Her response came with a quiet sigh, almost as if she was disappointed in me. "I thought you'd understand." "I really did." "Well, I don't," I replied flatly. "And I don't think I ever will." I ended the conversation then. I felt no relief, no sense of closure, only the gnawing reality that this was it. She was gone. And as much as I hated how it had all unfolded, I knew there was no turning back. The next week, I moved forward with the divorce proceedings, officially severing the final ties between us. I could almost feel the weight lifting off my shoulders as each legal step brought me closer to freedom. Emily had her chance. She made her choice. And I was done. As for Diane, well, we continued to see each other. I wasn't rushing into anything, but for the first time in a long time, I felt the stirrings of hope. I was allowed to be happy again. I still thought about Emily, of course. It was impossible not to. But every day I spent with Diane, every laugh, every quiet moment shared, reminded me that life goes on. It might not be the life I had imagined, but it was mine now. There's a certain kind of finality that comes with ending a chapter of your life. It doesn't matter how messy it was, how long it dragged on, or how many unanswered questions you're left with. At some point, you reach the conclusion, and you realize there's no turning back. The process of ending my marriage with Emily was like flipping a page I had been unwilling to acknowledge. The page was filled with too much pain, too many disappointments, and too much loss. But it was also the page that let me turn toward something new. The paperwork was filed, the legal battles began, and soon enough, the wheels of divorce were grinding forward. At first, it felt like a distant, cold process. There was no real emotion to it, just forms to fill out, documents to sign. I thought about the life I had built with Emily, the memories, the inside jokes, the vacations we took. There were so many moments that felt significant at the time, and now they felt distant, like they belonged to a version of me that no longer existed. Emily was no longer the woman I thought I had married. And the man I had been with her? He was someone else too. The nights were the hardest. I found myself lying awake, the darkness swallowing me whole, wondering what had gone wrong, if I could have done something differently, if I had missed the warning signs earlier. But that was just the pain talking. In my heart, I knew that the way things had played out was a consequence of choices, both hers and mine. It was too late to change anything now. Yet even amidst all that grief, there was something shifting inside me. It was subtle at first, like the first stirrings of spring after a long winter. I started to see the world through a different lens. For the first time in years, I wasn't defining myself by my marriage. I wasn't just Emily's husband anymore. I was Alex. And Alex had a future that was waiting to be written. Diane, as unexpected as it was, played a big part in that shift. I had never anticipated meeting anyone new, especially not so soon. But there was a lightness in Diane's presence that reminded me of how much I had lost sight of who I was while wrapped up in the chaos of my marriage. Diane wasn't trying to replace Emily. She was just a breath of fresh air, someone who was simply happy to share time with me, to see the world with a sense of wonder that I hadn't realized I'd lost. We spent weekends exploring the city, going to art galleries, trying out new coffee shops, walking through parks, and laughing without worrying about what the future held. It was refreshing, like stepping into the sun after a long storm. I wasn't in love yet. I was still healing, still figuring out what I wanted, but I was enjoying the ride. Diane didn't pressure me for answers. She understood that I was still picking up the pieces of my old life. And, for the first time, I appreciated that. I didn't have to rush. I didn't have to put a label on anything. But even in the midst of these small joys, the shadow of my past still loomed. Emily wasn't gone. Not completely. I would find myself receiving the occasional text from her, often at odd hours, usually with some form of "I miss you" or "I've been thinking about us." At first, I'd feel the pull, the temptation to believe in the possibility of reconciliation. But each time I went over our history in my mind, the reality became clearer. Emily had made her choice. She had wanted something else. And I had chosen myself. And that choice, for the first time in a long time, felt right. When the final hearing came up for the divorce, it felt like both a relief and a burden lifted. Emily wasn't at the hearing, and though I expected to feel some sort of anger or bitterness, I didn't. I felt nothing but clarity. The divorce was finalized, and I walked out of the courthouse with a sense of freedom I hadn't known I was missing. It wasn't about the legal victory. It wasn't even about the assets or the house. It was about me, about reclaiming my life, my identity, my future. I had spent so long living in the shadow of a relationship that had turned toxic, believing that my worth was tied to being someone's partner. But now I was learning that my worth was simply in being me. Alex. Just Alex. Diane and I continued to see each other, taking things slow, no rush to define it. We enjoyed each other's company, and it felt like I was rediscovering myself along the way. She didn't ask for much, just for me to be present, which was a refreshing change. The weight of the past, of Emily's betrayals, of my own failures, started to feel lighter, like it belonged to another time, another version of me. I still thought about Emily, sure. There were moments when I caught myself reminiscing about the good times, about who we had been before everything fell apart. But those moments became less frequent. And when they did come, I didn't feel sadness. I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned. Gratitude for the person I had become. I realized that sometimes you need to lose yourself in order to find who you truly are. And Emily? Well, I could only hope she figured herself out. If she was ever going to find peace, it wouldn't be with me. That much was clear. As for me, I had a future to build, a future that was entirely mine, free from the shadows of the past. It was terrifying in a way, but it was also exhilarating. I didn't know what it would look like, but I was finally open to discovering it. One step at a time. It's strange how life can completely change in an instant. One day, everything is fine, and then just like that, your world is turned upside down. I never expected to be sitting here today, thinking about a future without Emily, without everything I thought I knew. It feels like an entire chapter has closed. And while I don't know what the next one holds, I'm more certain than I've ever been that I'm moving forward. After everything that happened, I had to take a long, hard look at myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't just thinking about what she wanted or what I could do to make things better for us. I was thinking about what I wanted, what I needed, what would make me happy. And it turns out there's a lot more to life than just making someone else's needs your entire world. Diane and I had been spending more time together lately. She wasn't a replacement for Emily, not by any means. But she was someone who saw me for who I really was, someone who wasn't trying to change me, control me, or redefine the terms of our relationship on a whim. Diane was warm, funny, and kind, and being with her felt easy in a way I hadn't known in a long time. It was like breathing again after being underwater for far too long. I knew I was taking things slowly. I wasn't rushing into anything, especially with the mess of my past still hanging over me. But being around Diane made me realize something important. I didn't have to settle for less. I didn't have to be someone I wasn't just to make someone else feel validated. I wasn't going to live my life according to someone else's expectations. I had let Emily dictate the rules for so long, pretending everything was fine and that we could fix the cracks in our marriage. But there were no more illusions. I saw things for what they truly were now. I had stayed in a relationship that wasn't healthy for me, holding on to something that wasn't even real. And while I wasn't entirely sure what the future held, I knew I was in control of it now. The weight of Emily's betrayal, her need for validation, her desire to tear apart the very foundation of our marriage, it had all lifted. It wasn't something I needed to carry anymore. I had begun to see the silver lining in all of this, even though it wasn't obvious at first. It was only after everything collapsed that I started rebuilding, brick by brick. And I wasn't going to stop. I've been more focused on work, on rediscovering hobbies I'd abandoned, and on forging deeper friendships with people who had always been there for me. I even started taking weekend trips to places I never thought I'd have the time for. There was so much of the world I had missed out on while I'd been tangled up in a relationship that held me back. There were days when I still felt the sting of betrayal, when the memories of Emily and everything she had said and done played on repeat in my mind. But those days were fewer, and the weight of them grew lighter. I wasn't going to be defined by this. I wasn't going to let it break me. As for Emily, she tried to reach out once more a few weeks after our last conversation. She wanted to meet, to talk about moving forward in a civilized manner for the sake of the divorce. But by then, I had already made my peace. There was nothing left to say, no more apologies that would make a difference. I had seen enough. I sent her a simple message, saying that we didn't need to meet. I had moved on and I wasn't interested in revisiting the past. I didn't owe her any more explanations. I had done everything I could and I was done. And in that moment, I realized something. I had reclaimed my life. I had freed myself from the chaos, the manipulation, the uncertainty. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but it was real. I look back on my time with Emily and don't feel bitterness anymore, just a quiet sense of relief. I've learned so much about myself through all this. The mistakes, the heartache, the anger, and I'm thankful for the lessons, even if they came at a heavy cost. The person I was before Emily, the one who allowed himself to be controlled, to be swayed by her whims and her need for constant validation, that person is gone, and I'm not going back. For the first time in a long time, I'm excited about what's next. And this time it's all on my terms.